usual, this is Dean Smith from the Community of Human and Organizational Learning. And I'm slowly letting people in from the waiting room. So I'm going to do just a usual little bit of slow introduction here until I see that we have everybody. And it looks like we do. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today with the discussion from Ron Butcher. And I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Bob Latino, to give a little more color commentary and introduction about Ron and his presentation, or his discussion today, I should say. So Bob.
All right, well, thank you, Dean. Welcome, everybody. I just wanted to give a brief introduction because I don't want to take time away from Ron's actual content. I've known Ron probably 20 or 30 years. He's an advocate for safety. He comes from the power industry of AES in corporate safety. He had attended some of our classes. For those who don't know me, my field is has been in reliability and maintenance and root cause analysis. And we just saw the world the same way. And it became, he was a colleague, and now he's one of my best friends. He currently lives in Hawaii. So I'm envious. I'm an envious friend now. So we can say aloha to Ron and coming in so early. But our views of the world and how safety interacts with reliability and maintenance, a lot of people see them as disparate systems, but I think Ron's going to show you that everybody plays in the same sandbox, and we all have a vested interest in everybody's safety. So I will go ahead and take that and throw it to Ron. So aloha, and thank you for coming with us so early in the morning, and we appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bob. Thank you. And just for everybody that's that was in the waiting room patiently, it was more wake up the guy with the pineapple on his breast than it was any other technical issues being addressed. So thank you for your patience in the waiting room. So this morning I want to talk about the hazards of the context to kind of help everybody with my perspective. I come from a 23-year career in the Coast Guard. My first half was in aviation survival, search and rescue. I was the senior instructor at our training center in North Carolina when the Coast Guard responded to a congressional mandate to develop helicopter rescue swimmers. So we were able to implement that program on time, on budget. We had operational air stations across the country. Last count, I think that program has saved well into the tens of thousands of lives. And that's, saved and impacted. So a lot of good stuff there. Rolled out into the private sector, worked in the power industry, local government, Clark County in Nevada for a while. So I've seen safety in a lot of different venues, a lot of different contexts. And to Bob's point earlier, there is so much more to safety than I think we give credit to. And there's so much more alike between reliability and safety. I personally, coming from my roots in survival, I don't like the term safe or safety. My common conundrum is I ask people to define what safe is to them without using the word safe, safer, or safest. Because safe is really, it's a sensation of what we experience at the end when we're done. And it's what we do to get to that point that matters in my mind. So let's get started. And please feel free, if you have a question, if something bugs you or anything, let me know. I'll make sure everybody gets a copy of the presentation and the PDF handout at the end, so everybody has access to all this stuff. And good morning, by the way, if I missed that. So I see safety as an ongoing, much like reliability, resilience. We're constantly, the next challenge, because safety technically it's an adjective to describe our results. So it's a continuous process, and we're constantly in environments, contexts that change. So it's how attuned and how dialed in we are that helps keep us and our teammates safe. Going back to the old pair model of safety is is sort of a simple construct. And, you know, in terms of explaining safety, because we all come to discussions about safety with a certain bias. And so when we have talks with leaders and we talk about, you know, confronting that their perception of safety, while it may work for them, might not work for a large group, this team, this activity. So it's understanding, you know, if we understand that things aren't quite as simple as we think, we tend to pause and take a more thoughtful, scientific approach of sampling what's successful, what isn't. So we look at safety, and Bob's familiar with this one because I annoyed him with this over the years. And then suddenly we add a little complexity to it. You know, now it's not just, well, what part of the environment is organizational, physical, physiological, and the human, psychological. We tend to focus a lot on the physical portion, and we miss a lot of times the other elements of what it is to be human, including our constraints and our limitations as human beings. It's we're trying to ask that little home version Craftsman generator to jump up and energize a neighborhood, and it just doesn't have it to do it. And we're kind of doing the same thing with people. So safety got a little more complicated when we look at the PAIR program or the PAIR model in this terms. And then it just gets wild. Now we start looking at the devil in the details. And these are just, keep in mind, this is just looking at a single task with a single human being, branching out and how you see the organization influences. And this will be part of the presentation, so I wouldn't try and break your brain trying to look at 4-point font this early in the morning. But, you know, we see things like personal limitations, we see organizational influences, what type of, you know, how well is our maintenance program being, and how does that influence? Are we using OEM materials, or have we saved a few $1,000s and gotten a subpar lubricant that will now increase our maintenance costs that we didn't, and increasing exposures? So we start to see a lot more complication and a lot more complexity. And so with that complexity, that means, you know, within that push of constantly adapting and adjusting to our environment, we have to do that within the realm of risks to our well-being. You know, I chose this quote. The last time we met, we talked about change and how it's difficult for people. And really, the only permanent in life is change and risk. Because, you know, to be completely free from harm and risk is, to me, to my understanding of it, the one condition in life we're all trying to avoid. So it's how we manage those risks along the way, and recognizing that we're no longer live in a simple world where, you know, there are teasers that of the known and stuff that we're aware of that we address and we build systems and structures for. But when we start to increase complexity and complications and add emergent characteristics, just, you know, the challenges of day-to-day operation, we start to see that change is constant and risk is constant. So how do we move through those different realms and ensure that we have reliable performance, we have safe workforces, we're allowed to fail, the systems are allowed to fail, and the people in those systems can be exposed to those failures without harm. And if there's harm within, or if there's the potential for harm in those failures, then we need to step up our game and make sure that the protections are there. So for me, and I owe this entire next slide to Mr. Dave Snowden, who came up with the Cunningham framework for contextual identification. Mr. Snowden, he still very active on LinkedIn. If you haven't read any of his posts or anything, I encourage you to. He's kind of what you would probably define curmudgeon as, but really super smart guy. He's out there a lot on IBM or on Harvard Business Review articles and stuff. But the Cunningham framework allows us to kind of look at how our decisions and how our ability to affect positive change in shifting contexts is important. And a lot of research went into this framework. The word Cunningham, as I understand it, goes back to a Welsh word to describe community, because I think he saw shifts in context influencing communities. So I think most of what our current safety solutions are based primarily in the chaotic and simple realms. And we tend to look at things very linearly. We're very much in favor of cause and effect relationships. We like those, they make sense to us. But the reality is trying to apply simple solutions to complex problems leads to a lot of failure. And one of the reasons the Cunningham was developed, sorry about that technical, and you can see now why they keep me in safety. So anyway, the whole purpose of the Cunningham was to help identify your context. And we see this, it's interesting, we see the importance of context in ISO 45001. From my understanding and following that over the years, the biggest or the last point of discussion in developing that standard was the inclusion of the requirement that the business owner identify the context of their work and the context of their performance, which, as you know, most US companies, unless they're working internationally, avoid ISO conformance. And again, like a standard, it's how you apply it and how you use it. But the ISO 45001 at least acknowledged that, context is king in terms of developing all you do to protect your people downstream from those decisions. And you see the difference in of decision making. There's in a complex environment, there's no real cause and effect relationships. Potential solutions are not readily available or apparent. There's not a lot of patterns involved to what's being done. So cognitively, I have a hard time really forming it into a problem solving or a definitive problem to solve. So that requires more, testing, interacting with the environment, and sometimes that's with simulations and other analysis tools. But we start to see safety rise from, or what leads to safety and reliability rise away from the work site and more into our boardroom considerations, the chief executives, that they understand, what you think isn't necessarily what is. And, I think sometimes they get, just like anybody else, they get in a rut where their decision making based on their experience, their muscle memory for decision making. And so the Cunningham is, I think, it's a somewhat good way of kind of communicating that these contexts require different things, different way of thinking, different perspective, different preparedness levels. And there's also to be noted is the Cunningham should have a sort of 3D effect to it, because there's a tendency for things to, as they do, normalize and will slip back to simple. And when you find yourself mired in simple solutions and you have suddenly an emergent or disordered or chaotic event occur, that may cause you to change. So you start to see the importance of preparation and planning, knowing what the system is doing, rather than go forth and do the best you can and keep things to, a reasonable level. So with context, I thought, okay, well, what does this mean for the person doing the work that we want to try and keep protected and free from harm? So this particular, I just started breaking up, well, what are the hazards that are influencing us all the time? I started thinking about, let's start at the inner ring. We send people out on a daily basis, go find the hazards, implement our control mechanisms, do your work, let us know something changes, and be tuned to the environment. And when it works well, everybody's happy, we get things done, the enterprise moves forward. There are those hazards that we identified that we can't really control and keep moving. We'll use arc flash as an example of de-energizing, and people, load up on PPE to do things energized and roll the dice. So while not fully abated to where the individual is protected, there are measures taken to lessen the effect of those anticipated hazards. We also start to recognize too, we start to see people normalizing things. Like in the early days of arc flash clothing, people were very, well, it's heavy, it's thick. And they started understanding that, well, this isn't really designed to protect you as much as it is to minimize injury. So then they started taking it a little more seriously. Now I think it probably has just the weight of common clothing. And I don't know that people really pay attention to it that much. So it's just our normalization of the things around us. And we start getting out into these unmitigated hazards, the stuff that, well, we saw them, we knew they were there, but never had a problem with it in the past. So, it's nothing to worry about. It's unlikely. And those we just, whether we do it explicitly or tacitly, we take that as acceptable risk. And we start to see leadership emerge in this realm or particularly in our frontline workers, who tend to look up for, as a social structure, what is safe, what isn't safe. Do I fight social pressure to raise my hand and say something's wrong, or do I just go with the flow? Human nature is generally go with the flow, and a lot of times we see how those get started. Outside the realm, we have, the hazards that we've detected that are capable of influencing our ability to continue or stay alive. And those we categorize retroactively as CIS. Then we go out, the hazards that we detect, whether we have perfect memory, absolute knowledge, we have a clear mind, the environment has the hazards it has. The environment doesn't care that we're interacting with it. It's just those things are there. So whether we detect them or not, for example, we'll go back to arc flash. If you understand how a switch gear can arc, you tend to be a little more cautious around it. But if you have no idea what that gray box in the middle of the floor is doing, you'll walk around it, lean on it, put your stuff in front of it. And those are hazards that we just haven't detected, that are whatever our database, our personal database, we didn't detect those things. And that's where we start to see teamwork, accepting and encouraging everyone's input. And then we hit the limitations of what do we know? How much do we know about everything? We learn constantly, we learn every day. So knowledge is important, and sadly in the budget cuts, training takes a hit, as I'm sure you're all painfully aware. Training in the modern era is sort of, we've bought this software program now, you get 30 minutes a week or a month, cram in as much as you can, and try and remember, something beyond the door jamb when you leave the room. And so we have limitations is the message of this. Then we get out into the hazards we don't know, but we could learn, continuous learning, continuous improvement, the hazards of the unknown that are out there that, they're there. It's kind of, I kind of equate it to, you look up at the stars sometimes and you can kind of just see the Milky Way beyond, the noise of city lights. It's there, you sense it's there, but you just can't quite see it. There's that kind of thing. And there's those hazards that we don't and can't know. And all of this is just trying to convey that we're a fragile species. And we have things that have been documented, like George Miller's studies on our capacity for memory and how we can only really keep 3 to 7 things in our working memory at any one time. Our emotional state, Scott Ledoux has written a lot about and researched a lot about how our emotional brains, we have the amygdala hijack when we're shocked and we're in a fear response, and that's, our fight, flight, fold, or fawn response kicks in. How emotions in high intensity situations can be contagious. And so it's important to plan through. It's always, when I was doing marine inspections in the Coast Guard, I would always ask, the crew, every time you come out here every day, spend your first 3 minutes asking yourself, what would I do if? And then just change whatever after if. And challenge yourself. What would I do if the captain had a heart attack now? What would I do if this, if the passenger choked, fell overboard, all those kind of things, and work with each other to do that. And that I go back to my old days of flying with the Coast Guard. Is we were either on the mission or we were training for the mission. We weren't, we wouldn't fly and bore holes in the sky for nothing. We were constantly drilling, constantly, to the point of emotion really isn't part of it. It's managed out. You have them, but you're left with 2 situations. You have a problem, you can either solve the problem and continue, or you lose the capacity to solve the problem and continue. It's sort of, those are your binary choices. And while that's not applicable everywhere, it does kind of change the way you look at this. And one of the things at the bottom of this is, I said the right answer at the wrong time is still the wrong answer. You can have the right answer if it's the right answer within a simple context. It may not work in a complex context. So it's kind of constantly, again, just like individuals have to attune and adjust to their environment, these Frankenstein-like entities that are comprised of humans around a central idea, we kind of suffer from those same characteristics, as much as I think tech engineers would like to think they can take the human out. But, our entities are a reflection of who we are. Any questions about this one? I have a voice like Carlton the doorman, so if anybody drops offline, don't feel bad. You won't be the first.
So my question is, if I may, those are just things to help us understand or know that there are a lot of different hazards, a lot of different risks, a lot of different stuff going on. We don't process it that way all the time, meaning no. We don't look at that and go, okay, this is in that 7th circle from the center.
Right. No.
Okay.
No. This is just a generalization of trying to communicate complexity and understanding the limitations of our controls.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
You know, it's
Ron, let me hop in on that. And I think we see the world oftentimes that when you look at reasons Swiss cheese model is that we always see linearity.
yeah,
And therefore, when I have that right answer under these conditions, under linear, it's simple. But
yeah,
the fact is that we have the potential for failures happening all the time that we have defenses against. And that the cheese itself is, everybody sees the cheese as static, but the cheese is getting bigger, smaller, the holes are moving, the diameters are changing. So that's what got you from simple to complex, to complicated to complex. Am I reading that right?
yep, absolutely. The cheese moves.
Well, now I'm just hungry.
Yeah, it's, those nice linear, this hole matches here, that those cheese slices, they're changing in distance from each other. They're moving laterally. It's the Swiss cheese model is good, but you have to add the other dimensions to it. And that's where we have problems with trying to use two-dimensional models to explain a 3- and 4-dimensional world. Is kind of, and that's, I think, a lot of times too, where, as we talked about before, is there's a lot of noise in the safety realm. And, there's a lot of different perspectives. And I think we're all looking at the same diamond from a lot of different areas. And not that I'm tooting my own horn or anything, but from a survival perspective, next stage lower, all those other perspectives come into play. So yeah, it's important that we, the safety 2 camp, let's say, yeah, those things are important. Safety 1 is still important in simple context. HOP is important. Learning it's all important. And that's why I say safety really is, as a metric or as an outcome, it's a metric of organizational effectiveness and reliability. It's not one thing, it's the whole thing. And so we start to see, what are these things that we don't know? What are these things? Is understanding the complexity, at least, is, if we go back to that pair model, we start thinking of how do the environmental factors, what are systemic factors, organizational factors, social factors. And quite honestly, when we start looking at elements of developing essential trust and interaction and reliance on each other, the organizational becomes really important. We start looking at from a legal perspective. There's what they call the Frankenstein organizations, the LLC clearinghouses, that didn't work out, so let's shut the door and move on. And when you're downstream from that, I get it from, it's understandable from a business or tax perspective and liability, but from the point of having those individuals who now are supposed to trust in you to protect them, there's a block that they can walk away. So trust is always a little bit, and trust is very, all those wonderful things of what we talk about with psychological safety and all that. From my perspective, if I'm not physically alive to appreciate it, it's not that big a deal. I have to be here to play. So it's kind of understanding all these things and understanding that sometimes there are things outside of what we look at that are going to influence us.
Hey, Ron, I want to quickly convey a comment from Paul Daly. He said, somebody said to me recently regarding socio-technical systems, complicated is like taking a motorbike apart and putting it back together. Complex is like trying to do the same with a horse.
That's good. I like that. Yeah, it's, there is more to life. And that's, I think sometimes, we get so busy. I guess it's like we've joked about it, that scene in The Life of Brian where they run out into the desert and they're chasing Brian and there's like he falls on a poor guy in a hole, and they're claiming Brian's the Messiah, and one of the guys says, "You are definitely the Messiah. I know, I've followed hundreds of them. So you're the guy, but today." And I think safety suffers from a lot of that, that you have to defend root cause analysis sometimes because people want to call it something different, that internal conflict. And for me, people die and get hurt in those conflicts. So that was kind of my motivator is, can we all start pulling together for once, get over this paralysis of analysis and start looking at things as they need to be contextually. But that's a different discussion for a different day.
I get it.
So here we start to see, looking through the lens of complexity, we start entertaining now how equifinality and multifinality come into play. To my point of there's a lot of pathways that result in workplace safety, and that's our maintenance. And the stuff on the left is by no means all inclusive, and the stuff on the right is the same. This is just for demonstration purposes. But equifinality, you have many paths to one outcome, and multifinality at a point of complexity is from that one outcome you can have multiple benefits arise from it. And so we start seeing the connection between reliability and safety in this particular sense. And this is, again, oversimplified, but in terms of selling the value of safety to leaders or new leaders, new board members who may not have much experience in the space, this is, I think, a good way to do it. I may be wrong. I'm open to that because I am most of the time. But we see our means to our goal. It gets us to one point, and then that becomes a means to multiple goals. So hopefully that makes some sense to everybody. Any questions on that one? Here's the whole thing kind of put together. Just a reminder at the top, there are known knowns. There are things that we know, the known unknowns. And then there's the unknown unknowns, the famous Donald Rumsfeld quote, for coffee, because you want to quote Donald Rumsfeld on a regular basis just to win friends and influence people. So our realm of unknown unknowns, that's open. It has to be open because who knows? And that would kind of fall into the complex domain. And everything from the red ring down to the outer band of red, the unknown hazards, those are more systemic and organizational issues to be resolved in the complicated and complex domains. Those are the things that really need to be looked at and thought through. There needs to be more explicit communication about what people are risking, when they risk it, if they're risking, why are they risking, understanding that risk management has a bias towards financial success. So making sure that there's a connection between risk management and safety. Those should not be separate entities within the organization if this is your goal. So the whole rings and all that was really to try and kind of give people a starting point, compare how our current perception of what we control, the limits of those controls, and our need to open up, change our thinking to address the emerging problems of the modern world. Interestingly, I don't know how many are you familiar with Weick and his dynamic non-events. Carl Weick and Kathleen Sutcliffe, the University of Michigan, done an enormous amount of work on he's kind of the founding father of the HRO, high reliability. And one of the things he's yeah.
It was Managing the Unexpected was the breakthrough book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he's done a couple. There's a great article out on it's how the creation of dynamic non-events, which I think are safe results, where he compares or he uses the context of wildland firefighters and smoke jumpers to how they address the unknown, the emergent, what do those things do? And where I see the overlap with Conifan and Wyke is one of the steps in creating a dynamic non-event, or one of the mindsets, is resist simplifying. And where there's always a big push in safety and in most things is get it simple, make it simple, make it simple. And while we want to make those things simple, what Wyke was talking about was resist simplifying in your solutions. And I think that was, while he didn't mention it directly, it's a recognition of the different context that within a complex context, a simple solution will probably not work. And so you want to avoid, assuming you're in a simple solution or you're in a simple context when it's really more complicated and complex than you would like. And I think some of our bias towards simplicity, I think, to your point, Bob, about linearity, is that we love deconstruction and we love taking things down to those linear relationships. Unfortunately, a lot of people miss that we have to put it back together at the end and make it work. So
Ron, to that end, because me and you talk about reliability and safety all the time, is that statement from Wyke also, if you're sitting there talking about the reluctance to simplify.
Yeah.
That also comes from the purpose of investigating things. When you have a complex problem, 5 whys is not the way to go.
No.
But it's the easiest thing to do because it's simple, but it's not accurate.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of times you'll see, we see a lot of the incident investigation portion of safety doesn't get as much attention. The opportunities for learning, a lot of times, just being, candid, you'll see leaders that will jump up, and because the incident fit a pattern that they think they're familiar with, they'll jump in with a solution, and that oftentimes will taint everything. I remember.
So how do we know what the right balance is? Because I definitely appreciate what you two are saying, but if I'm a simple person, how do I know what the right balance in complex and simple is?
It's a great question, Dean. I think I'll put it up. I may have grown up in a simple world. Maybe, I'm not sure. But it's not simple anymore.
Well, good point.
So it's one of those philosophical questions. How do you know? Actually, I'm going to touch on that in a second.
Well, Dane, from my perspective on that is that, at least in the world of investigation, is that the level of depth and breadth of an analysis is going to be based on the severity of the outcome. So, if you're just having chronic things that really go unnoticed and become a cost of doing business, you might be doing 5 whys or fishbones. But if you have an aircraft crashing, you're going to go into much more complex tools to be able to get beyond the decision maker and understanding the systems that contributed to it.
Yeah, and I think, me being the cynical me, I think a lot of that too depends on the amount of media attention you get.
Yeah.
Those are good constructs. So thank you both for that. And Paul, thank you for chatting into the chat box your thoughts about and no simpler bit often being left out.
Yeah. So everybody will get a copy of this. And I think I might There's my favorite question. Anybody want to answer that one? We don't know.
Yeah.
And we don't know till we're done. And
That's a phrase I remember hearing in my medical work, Ron, was what's the difference between what was it? What's the difference between a medication and a poison? And it's the dose.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's, and kind of this goes to your question, Dean, is we don't know. And so when we don't know, we kind of get that sense of caution of, whoa, this is unusual, this is uncomfortable. And leaders need to be sensitive to that and not, not demonstrate what frontline may be doing, having to react. Time to step back. Retreat is an option. We don't always have to move forward. Let's stop, let's come. One of our rules in flying that we covered in one of those 2-minute pre-flights was everybody on scene. Didn't matter what you saw, what you thought you saw. If you didn't feel right about something, you call abort, and we would back off and look at the problem. That was a standing rule. And so, I think, when you get to a point or when your work requires that you're constantly at that ragged edge, you develop a sensitivity to it, let's say, in those environments. I think that's why we see more and more constant training as part of the job. Not everything is better when it's integrated, when reliability is integrated, when safety is integrated, when those characteristics emerge as a quality of what the work being done is. And sadly, I have a fundamental struggle with people trying to make a living dying. That just doesn't compute for me in the interest of business or cutting a corner. Or so for me, it's very personal. I know it shouldn't be, but we try. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons why, I love Bob and his family so much, is constantly trying. We just want to make it a better world. I find that's true in most people in this space, is, with whatever tools we have available to us, we're just trying to make the world a better place. We're just trying to work together to get along and get to an outcome that we can all live with and be balanced. And yeah, I think, for any other safety colleagues that are on this, it's a lonely profession. It's tough. You're the only guy standing between, a business leader doing what he wants to do and a work team. They want to do what they want to do too. And you're the guy on the outside trying to make a case. 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, it will work out all right. But sometimes people get bowled over or pushed, and that's where we get those headlines from those. My experience is not unique, I don't believe. So my hat's off to everybody in this space. So if there's any, we're all pulling together is what I'm trying to say, poorly. Anyway, what can we take away from all this? Context comes first. We can't come up with solutions if we don't know the problem or where the problem is. We have to, safety is a creation of dynamic non-events. And the best way to do that is being sensitive to what is happening now. And that's making sure that our people recognize they have the individual agency and collaboration and self-determination so that they can adjust their course. I love the James Thurber quote, "There's no exception to the rule, that every rule has an exception." emergent complexity and complicated scenarios they'll come up, they'll find the ways to reveal solutions that aren't within certain decision-making processes. So we have to make sure everybody at the front line has the capacity and is empowered to act in their own defense as they need to. Rules be damned in that case. Competency and currency, continuous learning is essential. It's just, we're either growing or decaying. So how do we want to do that? I have found the easiest way to do that is make it part of the work. Integrate it. Don't separate, this is how you do it here and this is how you do it over here. Make here part of here. God, that makes no sense. If this gets transcripted, that'll be terrible. Sorry, my mind goes in a lot of different directions. So.
Did anybody else hear that?
Yeah.
I'll send a decoder ring.
There we go.
So have a survival mindset. Understand that you're at risk and, you can enjoy yourself. It's just, really a survival mindset is being mindful. Be mindful of your environment. Be mindful of your resources. In the very simplest of contexts, when you go out to dinner with your family, crazy things happen. The tendency is we always want to go out a place the way we came in. You sit down for dinner with your family. Where's the other exits? Where's the way to the kitchen? Because if things go south, I want to get out of here in a hurry and I don't want to go to the clot at the front door. So it's just being aware of your environment when you're in traffic, giving yourself outs, not being too caught up in the entertainment center we call our brains, and take an artistic approach. I mean, I've had the great fortune of working with some really wonderful people and really fascinating and interesting people. And in conversation, I always find out they would have, an artistic hobby or background, whether it was photography or music or whatever. And I always encourage them, particularly when it comes to safeties, keep that artistic mindset. Look at things for what they could be, look at things for what, beyond what the surface is showing you. Keep your mind open to different possibilities for different problems. So, and then support that agency and collaboration, allow people to protect themselves. Collaboration is also what creates self-determination and that willingness to speak up and take that risk. So institutionally, you want to have those meetings. It's like you want full participation. You want people engaged in your pre-job meetings. And as a personal thing, safety oftentimes, because it's regulated, the pre-job briefing is required. If you want to improve safety and you want to learn about your organization, for the love of all that's holy, have a post-job meeting too, and do a quick gap analysis on how your plans went with what you did. It doesn't take a lot, but you have opportunities to learn and opportunities to see, and you get people talking more, and you'll get those situations where in your pre-job, somebody is willing to say, I'm having a bad day. My wife is thinking of leaving me. My kid had puppies. The bills are piling up and my head's just not here. Can I watch the tools today? Can I work in the storeroom? Those kind of things, being sensitive to each other and all of our nuances and challenges. And it's not a perfect world and we're not perfect beings. So being kind and supportive is important. Any questions about this one?
Ron, I just wanted to bring up, this is a comment for an idea, or at least a seed you planted in my head for a potential exercise in training or conferences. Is when you were talking earlier about what would I do if? I can see pairing up in classes and having that scenario come up and asking your peer, say, what would you do? You know, something you came up with, but what would you do if this happens?
Yeah.
I think that that's an enlightening exercise. That it's proactive too, because it's exploring things that obviously haven't been settled via a procedure or some type of standardization.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's funny when I would do survival training with different audiences. One of the things I would always ask people to do is, make a list, and you can do it collectively or individually. Make a list of the 10 top items you would want to have if you were, lost on a desert island somewhere. We'll do the Tom Hanks thing. And, you can think through here what your top 10 or 5 would be. Actually, we just do this real quick. Everybody think of your top 5 things you would want on a desert island. Got a good idea?
Yeah.
Anybody include toilet paper? Well done.
I got that, a satellite phone, a 6-pack, some matches.
I'd say a rescuer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have found it's really rare that people think of toilet paper, but it's an important element. Because no matter where you are, about 8 hours after you get there, that need will arise, and it's predictable. If it hasn't already, it's the nature of what got you there. But anyway.
Do we have any other questions? I feel like I've been taking up too much oxygen.
No, I don't see any hands raised or chats in the chat box. But I have one. So, thinking about the previous slide, Ron, and if I'm someone at a first line supervisor or mid-level in the organization kind of role, this is maybe a leading question, but how important is it for me, and how much courage does it take to sometimes coach upwards? Because as senior leaders, we've got 30 years of experience, we know everything, we have action bias, we feel the need to fill voids, when sometimes that step back and being purposeful, as you touched on, is really what's necessary. So how big a deal is that?
It's huge. And it's, that's one of those, if it's not demonstrated and encouraged at the top, it's unlikely to happen in the middle. And that happens a lot and more. And I see, I don't want to sound like the proverbial old guy, but I have a good friend that he always knew what he was going to do, went to college, he worked one location, he's an ad executive, and he went from ad exec to CEO. And so he knew that business top to bottom. Nowadays, I think it's rarer and rarer you find those situations. We have professional CEOs, we have people that, different tracks too. And it's really dependent on their openness to and willingness to learn. Culturally, we have issues. We've got, the Milton Friedman quote, essentially, that business has no social responsibility other than to, return shareholders' value.
Right.
And, that creates a certain bias. I think, compliance is yesterday's, what we learned 10 years ago applied today. So I think it's critical for senior leaderships and even the boards that they recognize how their decisions and how context changes, and things aren't as simple. But, to your point, and we sometimes get so busy doing what we're doing, we forget what are those things acting to prohibit us from doing that. And so when you position safety people or, other people, when you put them in the middle to try and regulate what you can't regulate, it's a formula for failure.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the best selling point is this is about helping them make better decisions. You know,
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
and
Yeah,
that's,
sorry, Ron, I interrupted your
No,
flow
no, no.
with the for more information part, which probably everybody's going, Dean, why did you interrupt him? He was going to tell us where to get more info.
yeah, and to that, or to avoid, you know, put in your spam mail. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Awesome. So I'd encourage everybody to screenshot that or whatever you need to do to capture Ron's info. Ron, thank you for
Oh,
thanks for
my
sharing
pleasure. It's
And
been
thank
my
you.
pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks for the aloha theme. Also on on the watermark on your slides, and also with your email address. That just brings a smile to my face.
Ah, good. I try to keep it simple, kind of a
Yeah.
whiteboard.
Well, thank
Any
you for the time.
questions? Oh, my pleasure. Let me
Yeah.
undo. Let's go back to, you can wake up now, Jessica.
So that was great, Ron. Thank you for the time. Thanks for the insights, everybody. Thank you for your time, and just kind of paying attention to some really great great thinking and great insights, and how we can apply them in our organizations. And one thing that the take an artistic approach, Ron, along with everything you said, I genuinely appreciate. And sort of building on that, coming in April, our monthly webinar discussion will be from Laura Flessner, who's CEO of a company called MindTap. And Laura's going to talk about innovation and how we bring that to practical application. So Ron, to your point of take an artistic approach, and sometimes that, we want to do that, but how do we do it? How do we create ideas and really bring them into reality? That's part of what Laura will also touch on. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Cool.
And
Excellent.
with that, Ron, hopefully you got a longboard ready to go with the surf out there.
Yeah, it's a little rough. Actually, I think it's higher surf in California today. It looked like they were saying on the LA news that Huntington Beach might get 15 feet waves. So that could be rough.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ron. And thanks everybody for your time, and take care out there. Have a great rest of your day.